Welcome to the Where Shall We Meet podcast. Our guest this week is Kim Stanley Robinson, also known as Stan. He is an American science fiction writer best known for his Mars trilogy of novels. Over his career, he has published over 20 books. Many of his novels and stories have ecological and political themes, featuring scientists as heroes. Robinson has won numerous awards, including the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award for Best Novel, as well as the World Fantasy Award.
The Atlantic magazine has called Robinson's work the gold standard of realistic and highly literary science fiction writing. According to an article in the New Yorker magazine, Robinson is generally acknowledged as one of the greatest living science fiction writers. Time magazine named him the hero of the environment for his optimistic focus on future possibilities. His most recent novel, The Ministry for the Future, presents a vision for how humanity might unite together to overcome the climate crisis. We talk about
what is science fiction?
The difference between utopia and optopia.
Being optimistic whilst remaining vigilant.
Predicting the future.
What the hell is terraforming?
Finance as a tool for changing civilization.
The current state of American politics.
Championing scientists.
If anything is possible, is nothing interesting?
Let's talk about the future. Hi, this is Umid Ashtari.
And Natasha McElhone. And with us today we have...
I'm Kim Stanley Robinson. Call me Stan, and I'm happy to be with these two.
Stan, so great to have you. Welcome.
Tell us where you are, where you're sitting.
I am on the shores of Long Pond on Mount Desert Island. So I'm on a lake on an island in the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of Maine. In my wife's grandparents' place. It's heaven on earth.
Oh my
Nice.
God.
That's a good setting for this pod, I think.
Yeah.
We thought for today we wanted to talk to you a fair bit about science fiction before we actually talk about your specific books, more about the genre itself and the things that it can do for the human mind and how it inspires us. So with that, I'll jump right in and ask you, you've been talking to some folks I've heard about science fiction as a form of optopia, which is an interesting term, which I think would be great if you explain. You also say that science fiction is the realism of our time, which I also love as a notion. So maybe you want to elaborate and we start there.
Yes, and thanks for that. I'm going to rummage around in the cupboard here in terms of my thoughts about science fiction that I think are still worth sharing, definitional questions that I think people will find helpful. So science fiction, there's a simple cut. Any story that's set in the future is a science fiction story. Let's call that my base definition. And it means that stock predictions and demographic predictions by the UN, any story set in the future is a science fiction story. And some people paper it over and try to make this look like a definitive prediction or a trajectory that has to come true. Never the case. So if you keep that in mind, it gives you a good skeptical eye for any story that is given to you that attempts to be like the real deal. If it's set in the future, it's a science fiction story and needs to be judged the same way you would judge Star Trek or Star Wars. And keep that in mind. Also, the future is big. It's really big. So you can split science fiction up immediately into, I'm going to use 3 zones, which is to say how far off in the future. There's near future, like Ministry for the Future and anything set like Day After Tomorrow, thrillers, what happens 5 years from now. Often the dates aren't there, but you can see that it's in the near future. And it's a form of realism that is focused on today, but pushing a few elements and using the next near future period to push those elements into more prominence. I like near future science fiction a lot. Then there's far future science fiction. Okay, space opera. We're out in the galaxy. We're zipping around faster than light. There's aliens. There's remarkable things going on out there. It's a story space that is somewhat of a fantasy, but it's interesting to think about anyway. It's quite different than magic fantasy or they're set in some feudal past. It's more like out there in the galaxy are remarkable things. Let's tell stories out there. And they can range from silly stuff like Star Wars, to quite interesting stuff like Ursula K. Le Guin or Ian Banks. The far future is a great story space. It just has to be understood as something quite distinct from near future. Then in the middle, it's a zone that I love. That is, I call it future history, because if you imagine the world 100 years from now, or maybe even 200 years, with the laws of physics being more or less as we understand them now, that's a big push. 100 years from now, what will humanity be doing on this planet and in the solar system? Assuming, being a kind of realism here, that we're not going to the stars in the next 200 years, because it's impossible. That's my novel Aurora, telling that story. And my Mars novels, my 2312, my early novels like Ice Age or Memory of Whiteness, they all take place in this future history zone, this mid-zone, which is a little depopulate compared to near future and far future, which just to me makes it even more interesting. Then, continuing, Omid, you mentioned optopia. There's a very simple dichotomy. The future's either going to be worse or it's going to be better. And you don't want to say it's going to be the same, because that's just boring. In our minds, it's worse or better. So you get dystopia and utopia. And there's variants. People talk now about protopia. They try to dodge the word utopia because there's so much political and historical baggage tossed on it. I'm willing to still use it. But I like this term from Joanna Russ, optopia. What's the best we could hope for given the crappy situation that we're in right now? So best case scenario, you could say, is the optopia. And I still say that can be still, you still want to use the word utopia to stick it in people's face that there could be a better society. And you can write stories about that, and they're interesting stories. Oh, and one last thing about science fiction. On the one hand, you really are talking about the future and saying these things could happen. That's not that they will happen, they could happen. That's what you're saying think of it as 3D glasses at a movie theater.
Right.
One lens is saying this could happen. The other lens is saying this is what it feels like right now. It's metaphor for now. It's symbolism, literary symbolism. The world, I feel like I'm a robot. I feel like time is accelerating. Well, you write that down as if it's real, and it's a metaphor. It's a literary metaphor. Science fiction is always doing that. Even the far future stuff is saying this is what it feels like sometimes. So those two lenses are not the same. You look through them and you're a sophisticated science fiction reader, and there are a lot of those. What happens is, like at the 3D theater, the flat thing in front of you pops and has a third dimension, which in movie theaters, that's 3D physically, height, width, and depth. But in science fiction, it's the popped artificial third dimension is time. So it's really the fourth dimension. So you read science fiction and the future kind of pops for you. You see your connection to it. It's a metaphor, it's a prediction, or it's an extrapolation. You begin to feel history going forward, and you're placed in it. And so you've got these remarkable, like virtual reality goggles, which I've never even looked into.
That's so funny. I was literally, my first question to you was going to be, when did you first put on a VR headset?
Never.
I did once.
Okay,
I did once, because my friends at Arizona State University, they run a Center for Science and Imagination. I've been helping them for the whole 10 years. I love these people. They're smart and creative and good, and well funded by Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State University, which matters a lot. And they've got VR goggles, which they put on me. And I was like, you know what? This is unimpressive. I'd rather do it in my imagination. So I'm not a big fan of VR. These virtual reality goggles to me are they're just an exaggeration of the way that we're all falling into our screens. And our screens are not as interesting as the real world. So it's a kind of gigantic and expensive category error, the whole VR thing. But I speak as a novelist.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry to push back on the VR headsets, but there's one that's about to come out, and I tried a prototype the other week. Stan, your mind is going to be blown.
Well, will it be blown if I don't want it to be blown? This is, of course, the interesting test
If you
question.
resist.
And
I even
yeah.
think if you resist, you're going to tip into that black hole and think, oh my goodness, I never need to get on a spaceship because I'm here already.
Well, but think about this, Natasha, and you're in the visual arts, so you've had a ton of experiences, and I wonder if you've seen yourself through the 3D lenses ever. That would be interesting to talk about, because it would be kind of not like your mirror image that you get used to, but something stranger, like being outside yourself. That would be interesting. But here's what I've been saying for a while that I'm more and more convinced, especially since Ministry came out, is true. A novel, the reader has to read it. They co-create it in their head. They have to make an enormous effort, and it takes about 30 hours. And in that time, they're co-creating. The sentences are just black marks on the page. Inside their head, an experience is happening. It's vivid. They even remember it as, and as a reader, I know this, as kind of something that semi-happened to them, somewhat like a dream, but a little more specific or well-remembered than a dream even, and it's vivid. Now, you go into the visual media, you go to a movie, and now it's vivid again, for sure. You're a witness. It slaps you in the face, but you don't get to co-create it. You are a witness rather than a co-creator. And you get to interpret it, you get to be involved, you get to be there for the 2 hours or the 30 hours. But you don't get to co-create it. It's more slapping you in the face as a witnessing, to the point where, like I myself, I couldn't watch a horror movie any more than I could watch a horrible event. It's too real. The movies are too real, and I don't get to co-create them. If I'm reading a text and the sentences suddenly go sideways and get awful, I can distance myself instantly. I can detach. I can put in the clutch and say, I'm not going there. But with a movie, you could maybe close your eyes, but if you keep your eyes open, then you have to go there. So there's certain movies I won't even go to. I don't want my memory scarred with those kind of images. So the two forms are really powerful, both of them, and they're really different. And I don't know if adding the third dimension of VR makes any difference to me. It'll still just be kind of a movie experience of witnessing something powerful. I mean, the movie Passengers was a great Starship movie. Oh my God. I thought that was a spectacular. You are there. You saw this. You don't have to go on a starship and get trapped like those poor people, because a starship is a jail, and that's a good story to tell. I've told it myself. But I'm an amazingly bookish person. I one time lost a game of Trivial Pursuits because I was about to win with the last question, which was who played the Frenchman in Casablanca. I had never seen Casablanca. And so I guessed Maurice Chevalier, and my friends just fell on the floor laughing, because that would have been bad in Casablanca.
I think, though, I don't want to get sidelined into a movie versus books or versus VR or any of those things, because I want to stay on point on you, in fact, and how you create these worlds. One is transported, and I mean, this happens to me with quite a lot of books, obviously fiction predominantly, but I think, as you say, you co-create. But for me, what I really get out of reading a book, and particularly a book that's imagining a different world and a different future like yours, is I get to be inside someone else's head and create something that I'm not actually capable of creating myself. That's what I find so exciting about it. On that point, could you tell us when you first started creating what I would call other worlds, or imagining worlds that you couldn't possibly have had any insight into? How old were you? And tell us a little bit about that trajectory.
Sure. I was a mad reader as a child. Reading books was a kind of a salvation and a beautiful entry into many, many worlds in my head. And I lived in a very boring California suburbia. And so the world was more real in books than in my daily life, except when I went to the beach and got in the ocean. So that was important too. Books and the ocean. And the thing is, as a kid, I was a geeky reader of a kid. I read murder mysteries, locked room mysteries. This was 1930s stuff, and this was all happening in the 1960s, but I didn't know any better. I went to the library, I read what I read. Science fiction didn't hit me till I left for college, so I had this unusual science fiction history, because many a science fiction fan ran into it when they were 7 and never looked back. For me, it was 18, and it was a college education. I was writing poems because poetry is important to me, and it's a great way for a writer to start. You do a page over and over again, it's crap. You go on to the next page, you do another poem. It's a learning exercise, and you never have to be good for it to be fun and instructive, like the power of a sentence. So I was writing poems, and suddenly I was reading science fiction, and I began to write science fiction. Something about the way my childhood home, Orange County, California, had turned into nothing but orange groves, and then it was a city. The orange groves were torn out, 5 acres a day, every day for 10 years. And this was shocking. But I was young, I was a child, and I wasn't shocked. It was just, oh, the world changes. It goes from agriculture to city almost before your very eyes. And so when I ran into science fiction, there was a sense of recognition, like a light bulb going off over your head in a cartoon. This is the literature that describes the way my life really feels. So again, that metaphor, all the craziness of science fiction felt right to me because that was the way I had seen the world go as a child. So I began to write science fiction stories that were pretty ignorant, but they had in them the ocean and very quickly the mountains. And what was the future of the planet going to be like? This is an old science fiction question. It was not original to me, but when I ran into that part of science fiction, what I will call the planetary romance, you go to another planet and it's got wilderness and it's crazy interesting. That was the wing of it that I began to write in almost immediately. And then, this is the late 60s, but for me, really the 70s. A young person in the 70s was having a crazy time, more or less by definition, but especially college students, the Vietnam War. My life in the 70s was interesting, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, but it was quite crazy. But it was a political education for me, a leftist education, working under Frederick Jameson at UC San Diego, and getting into a kind of California Buddhism and Western Marxism and wilderness studies. This is my triad of strange influences combining to make my work. And the leftism led to this notion, let's write about better futures, where the political system is smarter, where people are getting along together better. That's the optopian strand.
To pick up on the notion of an optopia that you're mentioning here, you can do two things with this, or you can do many things with sci-fi, but I think one thing that was really inspiring for many people was the notion that the first kiss between a black female and a white male was, in Star Trek on TV, for instance. And that is an inspiring moment. But what you can also do is you can get people shit scared so that they actually act. And that is what Ministry of the Future does really so well, because the problem of climate change is one that, you're the frog in the pot and it's boiling and you don't realize until it really hits you. And that's what's happening to us. And you wanted to just show that, no, there's a devastating day at some point that is going to lead to millions of people dying. And how do you strike the balance in an optopia to make it then something that, still inspires, but also has the stick that gets people into action?
Well, the first thing to say there is, I don't know. It's a matter of instinctual choices. It would be, it would be like asking Natasha, how do you act in this particular scene? And then you realize, it would be like, that's sort of like asking a tennis player, how do you serve? You do it.
Right.
And articulating, although you actually do have a craft and you do have a gift, you can't articulate it in describing it. You can't say, I do X, then I do Y, then I do Z.
I like that.
But, being a writer, it is a matter of sentences and you have to think about it. And you also can revise in a way that you can't when you're serving in tennis or when you're enacting and singing. Although you can have another take, right? You do another take. You try it again, over and over again, reiteratively, until you get to where you like it or the director likes it. For me, being the actor and the director, when I'm doing a book, there's a plausibility test and a matter of guessing. If I were a reader, the feelings would be, or I've now got an audience that has read many novels by me. They're used to me. I'm kind of a brand, friendly, comic, low-keyed. If that writer punches you on the nose, smashes you in the mouth with a kind of a horror scene, that will be extra shocking.
Right.
Why is Stan doing this? He's never done this before. So I'm not only just playing with Optopia in the abstract, but novel 20 from me with a known readership who, it's only just my core readership, maybe 25% of my readers that keep coming back. But those are the ones that I'm thinking about. Unfortunately, at this point, I sometimes call it the needle in the eyeball. The sentence that is a needle in the eyeball. It lances in, you can't remove that phrase from your mind. It's awful. The scene is awful. But
then you ring
in
an alarm bell, essentially. And did you decide to ring that alarm bell before you started writing that book, or did it come upon you as you were writing it? Did you have a sort of self-realization of the situation that we were in, or was it very intentional right from the beginning?
Oh, it was intentional. Yeah. I read this report about wet bulb 35 in the medical literature, the scientific literature. They began to think about it in a way they hadn't before. This is actually news from about 2010 or 2015, that the human body cannot survive a combination of heat and humidity that's high enough unless they've got air conditioning. And unless they've got electricity. But the grid goes down all the time. And at that point, because of climate change, this combination of heat and humidity that they called wet bulb 35, which is just an index, heat and humidity index. Everybody understands this now. And everybody's felt it in their own body. A hot day in the desert, you can handle 105. You're sweating. You're kind of cool. You're going, God damn, this is like being in an oven, but you don't feel threatened. A day of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, where the humidity is up above 50%, and you're thinking, man, I need to get shelter here. I'm gonna overheat. Faces are flushed, sweating doesn't work, and hyperthermia is just as dangerous for life as hypothermia. So we all understand you could freeze to death, but we don't understand as well that you could cook to death or parboil or poach to death.
Yeah.
Such that, you even get in the water, as in the last scene, the last moment in the first scene of Ministry for the Future. If you get in the water and it's too hot and the air's too hot, it doesn't help you. You die anyway. The organ failure, it can happen within about 5 to 10 hours. If your body temperature is up above and you can't cool it down, organ failure quickly follows and you die. Well, this is actually news. And if I had said this to you in 1995, you could with some justification, you could doubt that it's true. Well, you just you lay down in the shade, you take your clothes off, you fan yourself with a fan, you're going to be all right. No, it turns out that's not true because of these temperatures and combinations of heat and humidity. One of the highest wet bulb temperatures ever recorded was outside of Chicago. So this isn't just the tropics. It's everywhere where heat and humidity combine, which isn't everywhere for sure, but it's a lot of places. The Midwest and the Southeast and the East Coast of the United States are very humid when they're hot. And so these heat domes, and in Europe, are killing people. And it's usually the people who are ill or old or very young or somehow vulnerable to the heat, wet bulb heat temperatures. Well, okay, let me put the context also for you. I'll try to keep it brief, but in the time when I learned this, there were a group of people who were saying humanity will just adapt to climate change. Why all this worry? Why this attack on fossil fuels? We need energy. Humans are adaptable. The temperature will get hotter, sure, but so what? This was a group of social scientists, humanists. They usually were not medical people. They usually did not work outdoors, but they were making these claims in academia and also in policy spaces. And it was a kind of, let's adapt rather than mitigate. It was a philosophical position. Humans can adapt to anything. We're so adaptable. And it wasn't true. So I wanted the punch on the nose to land on a certain group of people who were being stupid and pretending they were smart. And it was economically convenient for them. So they get paid massively by the fossil fuel industry to say this stuff. But it turns out not to be true. And one of the reasons that we're stumbling into such a dangerous situation around the world with climate change is because there's an influential group of people saying, oh, it's not that bad. We'll just adapt. But in fact, many people will die. I needed to tell that story. And then I wanted to continue the story out of a stubborn desire to keep it utopian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're in a terribly dangerous situation. That's true. We could escape. That's also true. The could. If we were to do a lot of things right in the next few decades, well, what are those things? And why would we do them? And could I explain all that in one novel? I wanted to put it all in one novel, and I wanted to squish it in between, no more trilogies, no more 1,000 pages. Admittedly, it's like 500 pages. But I wanted to get the whole story in there of the danger and the escape from the danger by struggle. And then the last thing that I wanted to say about Omen's question is this. It had to be plausible to a reader at every single moment along the way. I wanted people reading it never to say, oh, that wouldn't happen. Every chapter had to be constructed as a little plausibility test. Yes, that could happen. I'll give the novel this, and I'll read onwards. Yes, I'll agree that could happen. And at no point do you get kicked out of the novel. But by the time you're done with 500 pages, you're in a very different space than we are now. And it's all happened without you ever having your impossibility flag go up. So that was the working plan.
Yeah, and I think one element that you brought up in there is the terraforming, which, by the way, you also bring up in the Mars trilogy, which I think a lot of people find very controversial as an idea and as a topic. But in the way you introduce it in that book, all of a sudden it makes complete sense, right? That the Indians would say, hey, no, we're going to unilaterally do something here. I'm not going to give too much about the book away, but I think introducing the notion of what needs to be done when shit hits the fan is an interesting one. The Mars trilogy is a little bit of a different story around terraforming, but I'd love to get your take on terraforming and how you feel about the whole topic as such. And please define terraforming as well.
Sure. And I appreciate this very much because it's actually been one of the main topics out of Ministry for the Future that has grown since the book came out. And I've been both forced and inclined to follow it as a story. So when you get to Mars and it has no atmosphere and it's totally poisonous and you turn it into an Earth-like space where you can walk around in shirt sleeves, that's called terraforming. It's a science fiction word. You form a terra. And it's an old story in science fiction, but Mars was given to us on a plate in 1976, and the terraforming people and the Mars people kind of became the same people, including Carl Sagan, saying, if humans, our powers are not infinite, but there are some things that we can do as a technological species, and we could actually tweak Mars's climate and melt its water, its frozen water that's under the surface. There's a lot of water there. It turns out we could liquefy Mars. The recipe for terraforming and the actual conditions on Mars were quite close to each other, and so a little genre of its own, Let's Terraform Mars, blew up right before I took up the story and wrote it up in my Mars trilogy, which is a very detailed examination of that possibility. There are some little impossibilities hidden in that story that nobody knew about when I wrote it, so I won't go there. So what we call it here on Earth, it's a bad joke. Let's terraform the Earth. Well, it's what we want. Let's keep it going. Then it becomes called geoengineering. And geoengineering now has a very controversial term. Oh, we've already wrecked the Earth. If we mess with it more, we'll make it even worse. This is a very common reaction. People who aren't quantitative or scientific, who are intend to distrust science or authority or the fossil fuel industries, all this is perfectly justified, but it ends up in an attitude that is saying we might as well not even try to fix things when actually we should try to fix things. And there are a few things that we can do. And as we don't reduce fossil fuel emissions, we have people like the Trump administration fronting for the fossil fuel industries, and there's actually a whole lot of not climate denialism. People say, oh, climate change is happening, but I'm not going to do anything about it. What are you going to say? Well, we're going to say that that's irresponsible and terrible, but we're in a battle. And geoengineering as a term is one of these battle terms. We could cast dust into the high stratosphere using planes and imitate a volcanic eruption. This is what I portray in Ministry for the Future.
Yep.
I don't care if we can do spoilers all we want. The book is 5 years old.
Yeah.
Sure.
And since we could do that, that would cool the Earth by a degree or 2 centigrade for about 5 years. Should we do that? Well, I don't know, and nobody knows. It's an argument to have. But then there are other things. Could we make more marine cloud layers like the ones I'm looking at now and bounce solar radiation back into space before it arrives and cool the planet that way? Could we suck the water out from underneath the big ice sheets in Antarctica that are sliding into the sea that will raise sea level by astonishing and catastrophic levels? Could we pull the water out from under those ice sheets and slow them back down and cool the planet in the meantime? And then lastly, very importantly, the CO2 that we've pumped out into the atmosphere over the last 200 years, could we suck it back down into forests, into rocks, into the ocean itself? Could we pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and thus cool the planet and save ourselves? Same with methane, of course. Well, these are all open questions, and they all need to be discussed. This is my position on it, and I'm not uncommon in that. The resistance to the idea of doing it is a resistance, I think, from like 1980s thinking, 1990s thinking. Oh, the moral hazard. If we talk about this stuff, then the fossil fuel industry will get away with still doing what they do. Well, that was true in 1990. Now, since it was true and we didn't stop emitting fossil fuels into the atmosphere, basically a waste product, like not having a sewage treatment plant for our sewage, and then looking around a landscape that is completely immersed in sewage and saying, oh, we needed that sewage plant. We didn't install it. Now we've got to remove the sewage from everywhere, a very much more difficult project than having a sewage treatment plant in the first place. But we maybe can do it, and we maybe have to do it. So this is the political, technological space that we're in right now. People are maybe not up to speed yet on it, still applying attitudes from 1990, but we need to be brought up to date in 2025 and discuss these things. So I've been talking about it a lot. I have written a taxonomy of geoengineering ideas and what they might entail. It's become one of my specialties post Ministry for the Future.
With the benefit of hindsight, what would you sort of revise or double down on in Ministry if you were writing it now, if it was due out in 2026?
I made a bad mistake to mention the word blockchain.
Right, yeah.
I would pull that,
Okay.
because that brings in a world of useless crap.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say the thing I should have said was cryptography, using computers to digitalize all money. That's already been done. Mm-hmm. And blockchain is one specific technology, very cumbersome, very, in some ways, foolish, and energy intensive. With this proof of work, it's one could say blockchain is in some ways stupid, and so why did I use that word? Well, it was a mistake. If only I had said digital rather than blockchain, I would have saved myself a world of grief. Because for one thing, I'm not expert on any of this realm, and for another thing, it brings in a whole mare's nest of concerns.
but can I say one thing that I really like that you do, not only in Ministry, but also in the Mars trilogy, also in New York 2140, is you do show that the power of finance, right, is a very strong force that can be harnessed for good, right? And
Yes,
it's actually
yes,
crucial in many ways to align incentives so that things actually fall into place, right? And I do think that's
absolutely.
really great. And I love that because not a lot of sci-fi always does that. And I think this goes to the near sci-fi, I guess Ministry is near, but near and mid-level, not going super future where it's all, I don't know, world of abundance or whatever. This
Yeah.
stuff really matters, right? So
It's funny you regret the blockchain thing, because I have to say what I took away was this memory of carbon, of the metric being around you getting
carbon
credits.
credits.
Yeah.
Well, yes, you're right. That's important. I still think that's one of the crucial aspects of the book and of our world,
Such
finance.
a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just that word
Yes,
blockchain
I
has
get
a
it.
very specific technology, and I should have just generalized it or futurized it
Yeah.
and made up a word,
Right.
or you just use something like digital tech. For sure, a carbon coin would be great.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it would be, yeah, an accounting system. How much carbon did you draw down? How much is it worth? These, there would be a currency exchange. It would still be finance, and a lot of people are shocked and dismayed. But it's the world we're in,
Yeah.
and money matters so much. Right now, the UN, there'll be COP30. I'll be there in Belém, Brazil, trying to help the UN. They're trying to help the world. What would make COP30 more powerful and effective in the world? They're discussing that right now in detail to try to bring COP30 up to speed and help the world in this crisis that we're in. Well, what would help it is a gigantic bank account to pay people to do the necessary work, right? If it wasn't just discussions and agreements and diplomacy, if it was actually grant giving with some deep pockets where you could say, if COP30 could say to the world, we're going to spend $1 trillion US per year on green programs, on decarbonizing programs, make your applications, we'll evaluate them, we'll put out the money, it's going to be real money. The world would take notice, and it would, instead of being a spectacle and a kind of a celebrity culture, or there'd be a week there where COP30 will be the headline item for the week. Everybody will say, "Oh my God, climate," and then they'll go away, and the diplomats will gnash their teeth, and nothing will happen. And several nations there will be trying to screw things up. And because the COP system works on a consensus model where everybody has to agree to the final statement 100%, a unanimity model rather than a majority vote, the COP system is semi-broken, and they want to fix it. But damn, it would help if there was, in the New York novel and in Ministry for the Future, I describe it as quantitative easing.
Yes.
Which is the central banks making up this money from scratch and putting it out there and saying this money is valid. You can only do that in US, the European Union, and in China, and maybe in the UK. You need really strong currencies.
Japan.
To make up.
Yeah.
Japan, to make up new money without causing deflation or inflation. Like a little country that's in trouble and in debt, it couldn't just print more money. That would devalue it. The big, important, strong currencies, especially the US dollar, even though this is now the stupidest country, it's still the strongest currency.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to ask you about the stupidest country. What's it like being there right now? We won't call it the fall of an empire. I mean, maybe you've always had this skepticism around the system. I know your politics, as you said. I'm sure you must have had quite strong feelings about the sort of triumphalism or exceptionalism of America back in the 70s. Anyway, I'm curious about that journey this last, 50 years?
Can I maybe put a spin on that as well and say that I think in most of your books, what I really find is interesting is that the protagonists are not necessarily American, and the main countries are not necessarily always America, right? So you're assuming, a different world order from the outset, right? And so sitting there in 2025 and the superpower that is faltering, maybe, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. How do you feel as a science fiction writer looking at it now, and given the things that you've written, how it's playing out?
Well, it's so messy and awful. I want to follow up with Natasha's invitation to take it back a few decades. At the end of World War II, the United States was immensely powerful, and at Bretton Woods was able to set up a world order in which it was first. And you could say first among equals, but you just really got to say first. But there was the Cold War. The Soviet Union objected. China had its revolution and objected. So we had the Cold War. And then in 1990, the Soviet Union fell apart and Russia became a kleptocracy and an oligarchy and a mess. China modernized and decided to use capitalism as a tool for its socialist purposes. This is Deng Xiaoping in the late 80s after Mao's death. And so China became a third force, immensely powerful. And then the European Union formed as at least an economic force of its own, a member state, new thing in history. So all this stuff was happening, and the U.S. was stumbling around, very provincial, very ignorant of the world, very overconfident. Well, we're the U.S., we're always right. And then stumbling from one disaster to another, Vietnam, Iraq, the troubles that beset the superpower, because with the fall of the Soviet Union and China being still in a development stage, in the 1990s, it looked like there was only one superpower, and it went to people's heads in America, in American politics anyway. And in the general populace, there's an ignorance of the rest of the world. Many people don't have passports. Many people have never left the United States. And many people's physical awareness of the world, but also their education about the rest of the world is very deficient. So it's a provincial country, backward in its understanding of the more global situation. And so you get Trump. And Ministry for the Future was written in the first Trump administration,
Yes.
Written in 2019, and it looked like Trump was going to win in 2020. So I was very angry when I wrote Ministry for the Future, and you're right. I put the actors of consequence in Europe, and very often in Ministry they're talking to each other. Well, America will be no help at all here. They're like a big baby that we have to drag along.
Yeah.
Well, that was basically right. So now Ministry for the Future still reads with a very solid ring of authenticity, even though remarkable things have happened since the book was written. Things I couldn't have predicted, rather mind-boggling, and yet the book still serves as an interesting commentary on now because I wrote it during a Trump administration. Here, he won like 49% to 47%. It's a very tight majority, and the people who voted against him, many of us hate him with a passion for his fascistic tendencies and his vicious stupidity or his stupid viciousness, whichever way you want to put it. They're both true. I vacillate between which one describes him better because they're both quite true. There's something wrong in his head, and there's a lot of sleazy people who have jumped at the opportunity to be his brown shirts, his black shirts. The people in New York on the ground who are behaving like fascist terrorists in L.A., this is disgusting that there's that many people who want to do this kind of crap. But then the operating crew, his cabinet, the facilitators, his lawyers, this is a hall of shame. These people are going to go down in history as wannabe fascists who are actually quite incompetent as well. They can't run an agency. They don't know what they're doing. They're TV commentators running the Department of Defense. It's a shit show. And yet, 50% of Americans didn't like the idea in the first place. And the blue states that voted for Democrats and hate Trump are more than 60% of the U.S. economy. Something like 65% of the U.S. economy comes from the blue states. The 35% that includes a whole lot of people, the red states, that voted for Trump, that said they wanted him, are not very important in economic terms, not huge like the blue states, but they're numerous, and it's a democracy, and it's also a representative system with this electoral college.
Right.
It's a mess. It's a mess. I would say a minority of the country is driving America into a destructive downward spiral. Now, the empire ending, that's a good thing. And empires are never good. There's a sense of owning other people, of controlling their work, of sucking the value out of their countries and taking it back to your country. The British Empire, it fell. And now Britain's a better place and a more international place than it was when there was a British Empire. The American Empire was more economic than it was physical, but there are 800 American military bases scattered around the world. So it's physical as well as financial. And it's a bad thing. Now, if Trump destroys it by accident, thinking that he's expanding or thinking that he doesn't care, and the people with him, we don't want to be the policeman of the world. We don't want to be the financier of the world. We don't want to be the customer for the world. We want to be what? They don't know. They have an image that is vague and foolish. But if the bad parts of the American empire get destroyed by Trump by accident, it's kind of a hilarious irony that he's doing some good work along with all of the terrible stuff that he's doing. And he doesn't even want to do that good work. He would like to not do that good work, but accidentally he's giving the world over to a international crew that is, the powers are the European Union, China, Brazil, India, and the fossil fuel powers are in terrible trouble. That fossil fuel is poison, and it's being quickly beaten in the marketplace by solar power.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So all those countries are going down because their power was based on oil and coal and natural gas, and that's not going to work anymore. This is why Russia is so desperate and so messed up. This is why the Middle East is such a mess.
Let me take this thread and pull at it. Basically, you're saying, okay, they don't know what they want, right? They don't want to be the world's customer. They don't want to be the world's policeman and all that. There are obviously some people who are trying to articulate what they want it to be. And I think the tech bros in Silicon Valley are one of the strong voices right now, right? And so their notion is this, I'd say, world of abundance, right? And you're a sci-fi writer. The sci-fi that you write is not a world of abundance. I think I can tie this together with this H.G. Wells quote, which is, when everything's possible, nothing's interesting, right? So the world of abundance sounds kind of boring sometimes, right? So are they completely misleading? Are they completely deluded? What's your thinking when it comes to that?
But surely that's just
so
a justification for being extractive. Anyway,
well,
sorry, go
but
on.
it's yeah, there's both going on at once. That's why it's so interesting. And this word abundance is maybe taking on too much weight so that it breaks, like freedom or something. But nevertheless, it seems to speak to material wants, abundance. But before abundance, what about adequacy? So abundance is trying to say that a rising tide floats all boats. And so I can be stupendously rich because there's so much abundance out there that eventually it's going to trickle down to everybody. So there's a libertarian, right-wing, inequality, 1%-ish version of abundance, which is I don't have to worry about being so stupendously rich when people are poor because there is abundance, or there could be. And if there isn't abundance, it's somebody else's fault. That's abundance coming from the right. Coming from the moderate left, the Ezra Klein and his co-author, their book Abundance. Why don't we create adequacy for everybody because we could? Well, that's a different statement, isn't it? And adequacy, what we need abundantly is first, as a first step, housing for everybody. Food, housing, clean water, toilets, electricity, healthcare, education, and then a feeling of political representation, that you matter. These everybody needs to have adequately. And so I would say the word abundance is now a red flag for people saying, look, everything's okay. It's the only thing getting in the way of us of being great is regulations. Let's just go ahead and build crazily. And these goddamn Democrats and environmentalists have created a world where we can't build like we used to build. We built the Empire State Building in 1 year. Why can't we build high-speed rail from Bakersfield, from Los Angeles to San Francisco? It's because of regulations, which are basically a democratic thing. So a Democrat like Ezra Klein saying abundance is a political mistake. He's naive, he's young, he's smart as could be. He's one of the greatest interviewers on earth. But as a political thinker, all the tech bros, they are oversimple. They want one solution that fits everything. They're not complex thinkers. They're not historical thinkers very well. They say they are, but their understanding of history, to my way of thinking anyway, is simplistic and leads to an acceptance of inequality. Oh, inequality is just an accident, and these regulators getting in the way. We have such technological abilities that we could create abundance for everybody. Well, damn. How about creating adequacy for everybody? In other words, public housing, some kind of maybe universal basic income. I mean, I'm not absolutely down with any of the more obvious plans for creating adequacy, but sustainable development goals, the idea that nobody should be going hungry at night, like 2 billion people on this planet are, that it's more important to focus on adequacy for all, and then also tax the hell out of the rich. There should be a floor and a ceiling to human prosperity. The floor should be for everybody is at adequacy. The ceiling is once you've got assets of, say, $10 million US, you should be intensively taxed and be just like everybody else, except that you've got more. So this is my politics in a nutshell. And it all comes out but abundance is a good way to get into it. What are they really talking about?
I agree. I wanted to put a different spin on the question, though, that you sometimes say you're the defense lawyer for science, right? And I'd love to unpick that. And why do I bring this up is because I do feel that, and there's this book by David Deutsch, The Beginning of Infinity. I bring it up a lot, but it's just that when we use the scientific method and the notion of science, we can really invent everything that is physically possible, that is within the laws of physics in a way, right? And so it does feel like it is the driving force to abundance in some shape or form. Now, obviously, it's co-opted by this particular group in a way that is distasteful. But as a science fiction writer and as a defense lawyer for science, I would love you to talk a little bit about the value system of science. The fact that it actually starts on the left in a way and is aligned with your political thinking, which I don't think a lot of people actually realize.
Well, I love this, and thank you for leading me down this line. I have always thought and have been writing consistently about science and the scientific enterprise as a utopian effort in the real world that tries to slip by politics and just say, let's make better medicine, let's make more food, let's make more powerful protection for humans against death and disaster. And so science has this utopian underpinning in its basic value system. We need to understand the world realistically, without an overlay of human preconditions or ideologies or religious positions. How does it really work? And then how can we manipulate how things really work? These questions I love. I'm married to a scientist. I've spent 40 years watching scientists think and interact as a community, and I'm absolutely filled with admiration for it. It is a living utopian force in this world. And then the Trump administration attacking science itself is seriously cutting off your nose to spite your face, because science is what gives them all their food, their shelter, and their toys. These are scientific discoveries. And you're thinking, wait, food? But the Green Revolution, 8 billion people, growing enough food on this planet to feed 8 billion, even in the inadequate way we're doing it now, is a scientific technological accomplishment.
Yeah, for
agriculture,
sure. 100%.
Modern agriculture. And it has to be said, fossil fuels were really a big part
important,
of that, by
fertilizer.
Oil for fertilizer and tractors. Yeah. So you never want to be too condemnatory of moves in the past that looked like they were good, that then turned out to have a downside, like the sewage in the atmosphere. Science has done its best, but at all points there's been a power gradient that you could just talk about as feudalism or the 1%. The ways in which we talk about massive inequality somewhat disguise how awful and horrible it is. That a few people live like gods, and there are many people in cardboard shacks without toilets. This truth is so appalling that everything else should be cast in the shadow of that truth. So are we a civilized world? Are we a civilization? No, we're a technologized feudalist state that is actually quite horrid. Admitting that and then working on it, well, science has been trying. It's just that it can be bought. It can be directed. It can be overruled. It can even be wrecked. The attempt to wreck the National Institute of Health and the National Science Foundation in the United States by defunding them, by kicking them out of their buildings, by firing their people and hiring incompetents to take their place, to wreck science, this is shocking in its nihilism and its misunderstanding of the welfare of even the people doing the destruction. I don't understand these poor people. They really are... there's a suicidal, homicidal, there's a kind of Götterdämmerung. If I can't have everything I want and everybody tell me I'm great, I'm going to wreck the whole world. There's an attitude there that is kind of disgusting. But back to science, the force for good. You can't go against science for long before you begin to wreck your own lives. You can't buy a cure that doesn't exist. So these rich people are thinking, well, I'm rich. I can get private health care. But that health care won't include the cure that would have saved your child. So these people are rather shocking in how badly they understand how things work. And science is something to hug, to say, okay, it's human. It's not perfect. They're a bunch of geeks. They're hilariously bad at certain things, but they are also doing the work, the real work of understanding this world and trying to make it better for us. So yes, it's been fun to be a science fiction writer, partly because I get to write about science.
Yeah, they're my heroes. You always say that you're not a scientist and that you're an English major and that you are a writer, which is of course all true. But I love the fact that you build this beautiful bridge between what a lot of people separate, as you've just said, discarding of one of the most valuable resources and assets. And in fact, I remember being at a dinner or sort of conference where an awful lot of the scientists was saying that they were coming to live in Europe so that they could pursue and continue their research. And they were getting funding from elsewhere. It wasn't nearly as much as they would have got in the States, but there was just a sort of degradation of 20 years of research in a specific area, which, as you've said, would at some point in time affect the lives of the very people who are discrediting their endeavors. Anyway. But
yes,
I love that you've always put science front, and maybe it's the influence of your wife.
It's been something that I know by watching, somewhat like a sociologist or just an English major paying attention, the privilege of being able to watch scientists at work and have a formal relationship with the National Science Foundation and be on the inside there, and then be able to tell those stories. This is the thing. There's so many stories been told, and they begin to get a little repetitive, novels and movies. Where's the new stories? And then science discovers that, humans were walking in New Mexico 23,000 years ago. It's a new story. Oh my God. New stories are like fountaining out of the sciences. And if you're looking for new stories to tell as a storyteller, then the sciences are just this cornucopia of new stories. So I've been lucky in that perception and lucky in many, many ways.
What is it
I want
you
to
say?
actually...
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, there's some quote that we scribbled down that you said most fiction is about the 7 deadly sins, whereas science fiction is about everything else.
Well, I don't recall saying that, but that's a good quote. I'll claim it anyway.
Maybe it's not you. Is it someone else?
It's good. It's good. And also the 7 deadly sins never go away.
Yeah.
And the scientific enterprise is shot through with these stories. And so, like I'm doing a deep dive into John le Carré, and these are spy novels, but the 7 deadly sins, and especially since they're spy novels, he needs to write about betrayal. But it isn't just spies betraying other spies. It's everybody at all times. The risk and the dangers of betrayal and of trust, the opposite. So, okay, Le Carre, he's always about trust and betrayal. Science fiction is always about what we could do with what we know. And that's a big question, and it's a gigantic playground for good new stories.
I would be remiss to not ask you this, because it is something that is a preeminent theme of our time, just as climate change is. How do you feel about AI? I mean, you're depicting it in interesting ways in your books. It is fallible. It is very different than what, again, I would say the Silicon Valley Brigade would say AGI is in 2030, right? Like, it's not at all like that in your books. How do you feel about the current progress that we've made there? I know your opinion on it, so I just want you to articulate it. Maybe that has changed actually since last I've heard you speak about it. But we're making some progress clearly. But directionally, how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm interested, but I'm an outsider because there's so much that escapes me in the technical details of it. But I'm always asked, and as a science fiction writer, I need to say. AI, especially, AGI in 2030, artificial general intelligence, that's a science fiction story.
Yeah, it is.
It will not come true. These stories are everywhere now. But also, the science fiction story of AI as an agent, in other words, as a consciousness that makes decisions of what it wants. This comes from 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
But it's way older than that. But Hal is famous articulation of that moment when he says, Dave, I can't do that. And you realize you've got a malevolent actor on your hands somehow. Yeah. That story has infected our minds. And the AI that we actually have can be put to malevolent uses, but it itself right now does not have agency. Although, even as I say that, there are reports coming in that there are certain programs that when you instruct them to shut down, they try to seem to dodge that.
Right.
So self-preservation, is that true, or is that another hallucination of our own, because we are constantly attributing agency because these sentences that come out.
We're looking for it. Yeah.
We are. Yeah. We want it in a way, but we're scared of it too. So just to regard all statements about AI as being science fiction stories that we're telling ourselves, and be aware that it's both a metaphor and a prediction, like I was saying, and then interrogate it. A lot of it is hype, because you can get massive amounts of investment. You can get more money for an AI proposal to get closer to AGI than you can get for saving the biosphere now for climate.
100%. Yeah.
But this is a tech bro mistake. This is a bunch of. Notice how they are almost all men, young men, wealthy young men who think that their luck comes from their brilliance, and they don't. But that's overgeneralizing, because I have now met quite a few Silicon Valley people who are fully aware that it was the luck of being at the right place with the right product.
I agree. Yeah.
And so you can't overgeneralize, but there are some famous ones who are obviously gone bonkers, and are pronouncing in the way that it used to happen to emeritus scientists. They would know one science really well. Then they would go emeritus and they would begin to pronounce on philosophy and politics.
Right.
And it was clear they were as bad as anyone else. Well, there's a good book called More of Everything by Adam Becker. And he's done a deep dive, and it'd be worth talking to him, into what the tech bros say and why they say it, and how when you push them hard enough, even the what do they call it? Ethical altruism or
effective altruism? Effective altruism.
Their core beliefs are horseshit, and they're lying to themselves. And I don't want to go into too much detail about that, because it actually takes a somewhat detailed explanation. But Adam Becker has done the work.
Okay.
And so there's it's worth talking to him.
As we are on book recommendations, and I just, I have to ask you this question before we wrap. What are your favorite science fiction novels? I'm a big fan. I think you mentioned also Kurt Vonnegut. I'm a big fan of his. And I mean, Asimov, yes, for many reasons, but like Vonnegut in particular, I think is one of my favorites. But you tell me yours.
Sure. And these are different kinds of writers. Asimov's from the 40s, and he's Golden Age. Vonnegut is from the 50s, and he's the counterculture.
Yes.
And I love both of them.
Yes.
I like a whole lot of science fiction, but to get to people who are both entertaining and educational, I would say Cory Doctorow is fantastically good. Ken MacLeod up there in Scotland. Ian MacDonald in North Ireland. Actually, British science fiction is really good.
Nice.
As a general statement, I would say that the cutting edge of British science fiction is way ahead of the cutting edge of American science fiction, which is kind of morphed into fantasy and kind of they haven't captured the lessons that Ian Banks taught British science fiction. Almost any science fiction whose name begins with MC or MIC, the Macs. The Macs are fantastic.
What about, where are the new Stanisław Lem's?
Oh gosh, I love him so much. I'm a Lem completist.
Mm-hmm.
He's weird, but wonderful. A great science fiction writer, and he's kind of a pure science fiction writer. He's really interested in the ideas. He scorned the idea of individual characterization being particularly important. He's like Wells in that. His characters are types, but his stories are fantastically interesting. The Strugatskys are worth reading too. These Soviet brothers, the Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, these are, again, marvelous science fiction stories.
Well, you added a lot to my to-do list there. That's great.
Yeah. Send me also I love to read, and
Sure.
I've been getting some suggestions from Natasha, but send me books that you think will help me or entertain me.
My pleasure. I'll do that. I'll try my best. But I really appreciate you taking the time, Stan. This was a romp through so many different topics and very surprising and entertaining, and really enjoy your books as well. So thanks for all your writing. I can't wait for whatever else is coming next.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you so much. I dearly wish that we were there with you on that bank of the lake rather than on Zoom, but you brought us into your world, so thank you so much.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you both again in person, and we'll party again.